The year 2025 will be remembered in the history books as the year of the tariff. But for the average person standing in the cereal aisle, it feels more like the year of the vanishing dollar. We aren't just talking about a few cents here and there. We are witnessing a fundamental restructuring of how food reaches your table. It all started with the July 31st executive orders, where the administration established a tiered tariff system: 10% for countries with a trade surplus, 15% for minor deficits, and much higher for major trade rivals. By November 14, 2025, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection had to issue emergency guidance on agricultural exemptions just to keep the literal wheels of the industry moving. But the invisible wall isn't just a tax, it's a logistics nightmare. According to UPS Supply Chain Solutions, as of August 2025, all FDA-regulated products, regardless of their value, lost their low-value exemptions. This means that every single crate of avocados from Mexico or blueberries from Peru that used to fly through the border is now subjected to a formal, rigorous, and slow review process. We went from a just-in-time supply chain to a just-in-case-it-gets-through system. The St. Louis Fed reported in October that by August 2025, tariffs already accounted for nearly 11% of annual PCE inflation. Think about that. 1 out of every $10 you're losing to inflation is coming directly from these trade barriers. While the administration argues this is about re-industrialization and protecting the American worker, the short-term reality is a shock to the system that the retail sector wasn't prepared for. Grocery margins are famously thin, usually between 1% and 3%. When you slap a 25% duty on imported inputs like fertilizer or machinery parts from Mexico, that cost doesn't just disappear. It's passed down, layer by layer, until it hits the price tag on your gallon of milk. We're seeing the variety crisis take hold. It's not that the shelves are 100% empty of food, it's that they are empty of the food you actually want. The Turnberry round of global trade negotiations may be moving at an accelerated pace, according to the USTR, but trade deals take years, and people eat 3 times a day. As we move into the winter of 2025, the tension between nationalistic trade stomach is reaching a breaking point. This is the foundation of the chaos, a deliberate policy choice intended to bring manufacturing back, but one that is currently testing the limits of the American pantry. If you walked into a supermarket in March 2025, you probably saw something that felt like a glitch in the matrix: the price of a dozen large grade A eggs hitting an all-time record of $6.23. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that was a staggering 60% increase in a single year. But here is the part that isn't making the evening news. It wasn't just the tariffs. We are living through a perfect storm of policy and biology. While the 20% to 30% tariffs on packaging and feed hit the producers, the real catalyst was the mishandling of the H5N1 avian flu. By the end of March, over 30 million commercial birds had to be culled. The USDA, under the current administration, faced heavy criticism after laying off key officials in the National Animal Health Laboratory Network, the very people meant to track this, leading to a surveillance vacuum that let the virus spiral. This is where the variety crisis kicks in. When domestic supply fails, we usually turn to imports to stabilize prices. But in 2025, that safety valve was welded shut. Tropical produce like bananas, pineapples, and avocados, items the U.S. literally cannot grow in the quantities we consume, have become the new luxury goods. Because of the universal tariffs and the rescinding of low-value import exemptions, coffee prices spiked 21% by August 2025. Brazil, our largest supplier, is now facing a 50% tariff. If you're paying $15 for a bag of beans that used to be $9, you're feeling the Brazil tax in real time. But the empty shelves narrative you see in headlines is actually more of a selective scarcity. As reported by the Packer, grocers are slashing their inventory of niche items to save on costs. You might find conventional cucumbers, but the English, Persian, and organic varieties are disappearing because the margins are too thin to justify the 25% import duty. And then there's the labor issue. A July 2025 study by FWD.US revealed that over 500,000 immigrants lost their work authorizations this year. This hit the back of the house hard: meatpacking plants and food processing centers. In Greeley, Colorado, and Omaha, Nebraska, ICE raids and the revocation of TPS, temporary protected status, led to mass terminations. When you don't have enough workers to process the cattle, the price of beef goes up at the butcher counter, even if the rancher is getting paid less for the cow. To prevent a total political meltdown, the administration announced the $12 billion Farmer Bridge Assistance Program in December 2025. But here is the catch. $11 billion of that is going to row crops, like soy and corn. Only $1 billion was set aside for specialty crops, the fruits and vegetables you actually see in the produce aisle. For the pear growers in Oregon or the berry farmers in California, that $1 billion is a drop in the bucket compared to the labor they lost and the retaliatory tariffs they're facing from China. We are seeing a massive resorting of the American diet, where fresh is becoming a privilege and frozen is becoming the default for the middle class. The real collapse of 2025 isn't just happening on the shelves. It's happening at the border crossings and in the cabs of the semi-trucks that keep America fed. For decades, the U.S. food system relied on a just-in-time JIT model, a high-speed relay race where products like Mexican tomatoes or Canadian pork would move from the farm to your fridge in less than 72 hours. But in late 2025, that relay race hit a brick wall. According to the American Trucking Association's ATA, the combination of new tariffs and a sudden crackdown on labor has created a logistics lock. Think about the numbers. Trucks move 85% of all goods across the Mexican border and 67% of surface trade with Canada. But as of August 2025, the U.S. Department of State announced a sudden pause on new employment visas for commercial truck drivers. This was a critical blow because nearly 1 in 6 long-haul drivers in the U.S. are foreign-born. By December 2025, the industry was staring at a massive shortage of 80,000 drivers. It's not just that the goods are more expensive because of the 25% tariffs, it's that there is nobody left to drive the trucks. This led to the Tijuana standoff of late 2025. With the suspension of de minimis exemptions and the implementation of stricter FDA and CBP inspections, transit times at major ports of entry like Laredo and Otay Mesa tripled. Perishable food, berries, lettuce, and fresh seafood doesn't have 3 days to wait in a 100-degree idling truck. The Packer reported that by October, spoilage rates for cross-border produce spiked by 15%, a cost that was immediately tacked onto the consumer's bill. But it's not just the borders. Inside the U.S., the just-in-time system has been replaced by what supply chain experts call front-loading chaos. In anticipation of even higher tariffs scheduled for January 2026, retailers scrambled to flood warehouses in the fall of 2025. This caused a massive artificial surge in port traffic, followed by a freight cliff. By November, the Port of Los Angeles saw a steep drop in new imports because warehouses were literally overflowing with non-perishable goods, leaving no room for the incoming food supply. The result? A phantom shortage. The food exists, but it is stuck in the wrong place. It's sitting in a container at a port, or it's rotting in a trailer because the carrier company went bankrupt trying to navigate the 40% transshipment penalties imposed on goods coming through Canada. When you see an empty shelf in 2025, you aren't looking at a lack of food in the world. You're looking at the failure of a logistics network that was never built to handle a trade war of this magnitude. By the summer of 2025, the trade war shifted from a defensive maneuver to an all-out global food fight. While the U.S. administration focused on its universal tariff strategy, America's largest trading partners launched a surgical retaliatory strike that hit the heart of the Midwest, where it hurts most, the pocketbooks of the American farmer. China, which historically bought over 60% of U.S. soybean exports, effectively hit the off switch. According to data from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, after Beijing raised tariffs on U.S. soybeans to 34% in April 2025, exports to China plummeted by over 73%, a staggering $6.8 billion loss in just a few months. The empty shelves narrative in the cities has a dark mirror in the rural overflow crisis. In states like Iowa, Illinois, and Kansas, silos are bursting with grain that has nowhere to go. This isn't a shortage of food, it's a surplus of the wrong crops in the wrong market. As reported by IPM Newsroom in December 2025, the U.S. farm sector is projected to lose between $35 billion and $43 billion this year alone. Even with a bumper crop in many regions, prices have collapsed because the international buyers, Mexico, Canada, and China, have turned to competitors like Brazil and Argentina. This has triggered a wave of financial ruin. The University of Illinois reported that farm bankruptcies in the Midwest surged by 69% in 2024, and by the first half of 2025, Chapter 12 filings reached their highest levels since 2020. In some states like Arkansas, analysts expect bankruptcies to top 1,000 before the year ends, surpassing the peak of the 2019 trade war. It is a not-so-perfect storm. While farmers face a 25% tariff on the steel and aluminum they need for tractors and the chemicals needed for fertilizer, they are being paid 1970s level prices, adjusted for inflation, for their corn and soy. To stem the bleeding, the administration announced an $11 billion Farmer Bridge Assistance (FBA) program in December 2025. But many agricultural economists, like those at the Illinois Farm Bureau, warn it's too little, too late. This aid package is less than half of what was provided during the first trade war, and it primarily targets row crops. Meanwhile, the specialty producers, the ones growing the fruits and vegetables that are disappearing from your grocery store, are being left in the cold. We are witnessing a de-leveraging of the American farm, where the generational wealth of the heartland is being liquidated to pay off high-interest debt that was manageable before the trade routes were severed. If the tariffs are the spark, the labor shortage is the oxygen feeding the fire. As we close out 2025, the U.S. food system is facing its most severe workforce vacuum in nearly a century. This isn't just a political talking point, it is a mathematical crisis. According to a landmark October 2025 report from the U.S. Department of Labor, the near-total cessation of the inflow of illegal aliens, combined with mass enforcement, has created an imminent threat to the nation's food stability. The agency took the unprecedented step of filing a notice in the Federal Register warning that without immediate intervention, the food supply would face imminent, widespread disruption. The numbers tell a terrifying story for the grocery budget. Around 40% of all farm workers in the US are undocumented, and in the meatpacking industry, the literal backbone of the American protein supply, that number sits at roughly 23%. By mid-2025, the administration revoked the work authorizations for over 530,000 immigrants who were previously here under humanitarian parole and temporary protected status, TPS. Organizations like FWD.US and Investigate Midwest tracked the fallout. At least 90,000 of those workers were the specialized laborers in manufacturing and meatpacking plants. When you lose 10% of a plant's workforce overnight, the assembly lines don't just slow down, they stop. The result is what analysts call the spoilage spike. In California's Central Valley, ICE raids in June 2025 led to a 20% to 40% reduction in the available workforce during peak harvest. In Oxnard alone, billions of dollars worth of strawberries and broccoli were left to rot in the sun because there were no hands to pick them. A study published in Archive in August 2025 estimated that these raids directly caused a 5% to 12% increase in produce prices across the country. It's a cruel irony. While silos in the Midwest are overflowing with grain that can't be exported, Section 4, the fresh produce fields in the West are empty of workers, causing empty shelves in the city. Even legal work programs offer no refuge. The H-2A visa program, which farmers use to bring in seasonal help, has been plagued by delays during the 2025 government shutdowns. The Florida Fruit and Vegetable Association sent a desperate letter to Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins in October, stating that these delays imminently threaten agricultural production. To counter this, the Department of Labor actually moved to cut wages for H-2A workers by up to 10% to save farmers money. But as United Farm Workers President Teresa Romero noted, this only pushed domestic workers further away from the fields. We are currently in a labor black hole where the workers who knew how to feed America are being removed, and the US-born workforce is not stepping in to fill the gap at any price. By mid-2025, a new and frustrating term entered the American vocabulary, the trade adjustment surcharge. If you've looked closely at your grocery receipt lately, you might have seen a line item adding a 3% to 5% fee at the very bottom. This isn't a mistake. Major retailers, including Walmart and Albertsons, have publicly admitted that while they are trying to absorb some costs, the sheer scale of the 2025 tariffs, ranging from 10% globally to 25% for Mexico and Canada, has forced them to pass the bill to you. According to a report by Accountable.us, released in August 2025, executives from the nation's largest grocery chains are explicitly citing these tariffs in earnings calls as the primary justification for price hikes on essentials like meat, poultry, and fish, which saw a 5.6% increase in just 12 months. But it's not just the price of the food itself. It's the Buy American mandates that are creating a secondary price spike. Under the America Trade First policy, executive memorandum issued on January 20, 2025, the administration tightened federal procurement rules. While this sounds good on paper, it created an artificial scarcity in the private market, because the government is now mandated to buy nearly 100% American-grown commodities for school lunches and military bases. They are outbidding private grocery stores for the limited domestic supply of beef and dairy. As market intel from the Farm Bureau noted in November 2025, federal spending on U.S. food reached nearly $7 billion, effectively crowding out the average consumer. This has led to what economists call the transparency gap. While the White House press office pointed to a 0.1% dip in some grocery prices in July 2025 as a win, the St. Louis Fed countered with a much grimmer reality. By August 2025, tariffs were responsible for nearly 11% of all headline inflation. The reason you might see a dip in some prices is that people are simply too broke to buy certain items, leading to temporary fire sales on expiring stock. However, for the items you need, the staples, companies like Procter & Gamble and Gap have already signaled that more price hikes are coming as inventory sell-through hits the new, higher tariff rates. By December 2025, the average American family had quietly paid an extra $1,200 just to cover the cost of the trade war, effectively erasing the gains from any recent wage growth. While most people are looking at the price of bread on the shelf, the real disaster is brewing 6 months earlier in the dirt. In 2025, the U.S. food supply hit a resource wall that few saw coming. Agriculture isn't just about land and water. It's an industrial process that requires massive amounts of fertilizer, seeds, and chemicals, most of which were caught in the crossfire of the trade war. According to the World Bank's Fertilizer Price Index, prices surged by over 20% in 2025. Specifically, triple superphosphate, TSP, and diammonium phosphate, DAP, the fuels that power American corn and wheat, saw astronomical spikes of 43% and 23% respectively by mid-year. The reason? A massive supply chain decapitation. Canada provides roughly 85% of U.S. potash imports, and when the 25% universal tariff was applied to Canadian goods in early 2025, the cost of potash jumped by over $100 per ton almost overnight. As reported by RFD-TV, this added a crushing weight to the already thin margins of Midwest farmers. Farmers are now paying $860 per ton for phosphorus, making it nearly impossible to break even on crops like corn, where fertilizer accounts for 22% of total production costs. In a desperate attempt to fix the damage, the administration made a stunning strategic reversal on November 13, 2025. Under an amendment to Executive Order 14,257, the U.S. suddenly lifted tariffs on most fertilizer imports from the Middle East and North Africa. This was a silent admission that the America First trade policy had accidentally made it too expensive to grow food in America. However, the damage was already done for the 2025 harvest. Many farmers, unable to afford the spring 2025 fertilizer prices, simply used less, leading to lower crop yields and higher empty shelf risks for 2026. But the resource war didn't stop at fertilizer. The December 6, 2025 executive order on price fixing targeted the seed and equipment industries. The administration claimed that companies like Deere & Company were using the trade war as an excuse to gouge farmers on parts and machinery, which saw a 12% to 18% capital expenditure increase this year. We are seeing an input trap where it costs more to plant the seed, more to nourish it, and more to harvest it, leaving the American consumer to pay the final bill at the grocery store. As the clock winds down on 2025, the American food system stands at a crossroads between total fracture and an expensive state-subsidized stabilization. We have moved past the initial shock of the tariff tsunami, but the tremors are far from over. On December 8, 2025, the administration made its move to prevent a full-scale rural uprising by announcing the $12 billion Farmer Bridge Assistance, FBA program. While the headline number sounds massive, the devil is in the details. $11 billion of that money is strictly for row crop producers, the corn, soy, and wheat farmers. Only $1 billion was carved out for the specialty crops, the very fruits and vegetables that have been the face of the empty shelves crisis. This $12 billion is a lifeline in the literal sense. It is designed to keep farmers afloat just long enough to reach the October 2026 implementation of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, OBBBA. This massive legislative overhaul is promised to raise commodity reference prices by 10% to 21%, essentially baking higher food prices into the federal law of the land. But for the consumer, the bridge feels more like a pier. It's a long walk that hasn't reached the other side yet. The USDA expects these bridge payments to start hitting bank accounts by February 28, 2026. But for many family farms in the Pacific Northwest and the South, critics like Senator Ron Wyden warn it is simply too little, too late. Looking ahead to 2026, the era of cheap food is officially over. The Yale Budget Lab notes that the average tariff rate has stabilized at nearly 17%, up from just 3% a year ago. This isn't a temporary spike anymore. It's the baseline operating context. Businesses are no longer waiting for the tariffs to go away. They are re-engineering their entire supply chains around them. We are seeing a manufacturing boom in food processing, but it's one defined by robotics and AI, not new jobs. As the Oliver White America's 2026 forecast points out, companies are moving toward technology-first facilities to bypass the labor shortages we discussed in Section 5. So, is the 2025 collapse real? The answer is more nuanced than a headline. We didn't see a famine, but we saw a collapse of choice. The variety crisis is the new reality. Your grocery store in 2026 will have food, but it will be more expensive, more processed, and more American-only than at any point in the last 50 years. The trade war has successfully decoupled the American pantry from the global market, but it has done so at a cost of roughly $1,200 per household in hidden taxes. As we enter 2026, the question isn't whether the shelves will be empty, it's whether you'll be able to afford what's on them.